Hi, I'm John. Welcome back to Old Time Tales. And we're right in the middle of Daniel Webster. This is part 3. Let's continue. It was early in the morning when he got to Marshfield, but Daniel was up already, talking Latin to the farmhands and wrestling with the lamb Goliath, and trying to figure out a new trotter, working up speeches to make against John C. Calhoun. But when he heard a New Hampshire man had come to see him, he dropped everything else he was doing, for that was Daniel's way. He gave Jabez Stone a breakfast that 5 men couldn't eat, went into the living history of every man and woman in Cross Corners, and finally asked him, "How can I serve you?" Jabez Stone allowed it was kind of a mortgage case. "Well, I haven't pleaded a mortgage case in a long time, and I don't generally plead now, except before the Supreme Court," said Daniel. "But if I can, I'll help you." "Then I've got hope for the first time in 10 years, said Jabez Stone. And he told him the details. Daniel walked up and down as he listened, hands behind his back, now and then asking a question, now and then plunging his eyes at the floor as if they bored through it like gimlets. When Jabez Stone had finished, Daniel puffed out his cheeks and blew. Then he turned to Jabez Stone, and a smile broke over his face like sunrise over Monadnock. "You've certainly given yourself the devil's own road to hope, Neighbor Stone, but I will take your case." "You'll take it?" said Jabez Stone, hardly daring to believe. "Yes," said Daniel Webster. "I've got about 75 other things to do and the Missouri Compromise to straighten out, but I'll take your case. For if 2 New Hampshire men aren't a match for the devil, we might as well give the country back to the Indians." Then he shook Jabez Stone by the hand and said, "Did you come down here in a hurry?" "Well, I admit I made some time," said Jabez Stone. "You'll go back even faster," said Daniel Webster, and told them to hitch up Constitution and Constellation to the carriage. They were matched grays with 1 white forefoot, and they stepped like grease lightning. Well, I won't describe how excited and pleased the whole Stone family was to have the great Daniel Webster for a guest when they finally got there. Jabez Stone had lost his hat on the way, blown off when they overtook the wind, but he didn't much take account of that. But after supper, he sent the family off to bed, for he had most particular business with Mr. Webster. Mrs. Stone wanted them to sit in the front parlor, but Daniel Webster knew front parlors and said he preferred the kitchen. So it was there they sat, waiting for the stranger, with a jug on the table between them and a bright fire on the hearth. The stranger being scheduled to show up on the stroke of midnight, according to specification. Well, most men wouldn't have asked for better company than Daniel Webster in a jug, but with every tick of the clock, Jabez Stone got sadder and sadder. His eyes roved round, and though he sampled the jug, you could see he couldn't quite taste it. Finally, on the stroke of 11:30, he reached over and grabbed Daniel Webster by the arm. Mr. Webster, he said, for his voice was shaken with fear and desperate courage. "For God's sake, Mr. Webster, harness your horses and get away from this place while you can." "You brought me a long way, neighbor, to tell me you don't like my company," said Daniel Webster, quite peaceably, pulling at the jug. "Miserable wretch that I am," groaned Jabez Stone. "I brought you a devilish way, and now I see my folly. Let him take me if he wills. I don't hanker after it, I must say, but I can't stand it. I can stand it, but you're the Union stay and New Hampshire's pride. He mustn't get you, Mr. Webster. He must not get you." Daniel Webster looked at the distracted man, all gray and shaken in the firelight, and laid a hand on his shoulder. "I'm obliged to you, Neighbor Stone," he said gently. "It's kindly thought of, but there's a jug on the table and a case at hand, and I never left a jug or a case half finished in my life." At that moment, there was a sharp rap on the door. "Ah," said Daniel Webster very coolly, "I thought your clock was a trifle slow, Neighbor Stone." He stepped to the door and opened it. "Come in," he said. The stranger came in, very dark and tall. He looked in the firelight. He was carrying a box under his arm, a black japanned box with little air holes in the lid. At the sight of the box, Jabez Stone gave a low cry and shrank into the corner of the room. "Mr. Webster, I presume," said the stranger, very polite, but with his eyes glowing like a fox's deep in the woods. attorney of record for Jabez Stone, said Daniel Webster, but his eyes were glowing too. Might I ask your name? I've gone by a good many, said the stranger carelessly. Perhaps Scratch will do for the evening. I'm often called that in these parts. Then he sat down at the table and poured himself a drink from the jug. The liquor was cold in the jug, but it came steaming into the glass. And now, said the stranger, smiling and showing his teeth, I shall call upon you, as a law-abiding citizen, to assist me in taking possession of my property. Well, with that, the argument began, and it went hot and heavy. At first, Jabez Stone had a flicker of hope, but when he saw Daniel Webster being forced back point after point, he just sat scrunched in the corner with his eyes on that japanned box, for there wasn't any doubt as to the deed or the signature. That was the worst of it. Daniel Webster twisted and turned and thumped his fist on the table, but he couldn't get away from that. He offered to compromise the case. The stranger wouldn't hear of it. He pointed out the property had increased in value, and state senators ought to be worth more. The stranger stuck to the letter of the law. He was a great lawyer, Daniel Webster, but we know who's the king of lawyers, as the good book tells us, and seemed as if, for the first time, Daniel Webster had met his match. Finally, the stranger yawned a little. Your spirited efforts on behalf of your client do you credit, Mr. Webster, but if you have no more arguments to adduce, I'm rather pressed for time. Jabez Stone shuddered. Daniel Webster's brow looked dark as a thundercloud. Presto or not, you shall not have this man, he thundered. Mr. Stone is an American citizen, and no American citizen may be forced in the service of a foreign prince. We fought England for that in 12, and we'll fight all hell for it again. Daniel, foreign, said the stranger. Who calls me a foreigner? Well, I never yet heard of the death of your claim in American citizenship, said Daniel Webster with surprise. And who with better right, said the stranger with one of his terrible smiles. When the first wrong was done to the first American Indian, I was there. When the first slaver put out for the Congo, I stood on her deck. Am I not in your books and stories and beliefs from the first settlements on? Am I not spoken of still in every church in New England? 'Tis true the North claims me for a Southerner and the South for a Northerner, but I am neither. I am merely an honest American, like yourself, and of the best descent, for, to tell the truth, Mr. Webster, though I don't like to boast of it, my name is older in this country than yours. Aha, said Daniel Webster, veins standing down on his forehead. Then I stand in the Constitution, and I demand a trial for my client. The case is hardly one for an ordinary court, said the stranger, his eyes flickering, and indeed the lateness of the hour. Let it be any court you choose, so it is an American judge and an American jury, said Daniel Webster in his pride. Let it be the quick or the dead, I'll abide the issue. You have said it, said the stranger, and pointed his finger at the door, and with that, and all of a sudden there was a rushing of wind outside and a noise of footsteps. They came clear and distinct through the night, and yet they were not like the footsteps of living men. In God's name, who comes by so late? Cried Jabez Stone in an ague of fear. The jury, Mr. Webster demands, said the stranger, sipping at his boiling glass. You must pardon the rough appearance of one or two. They will have come a long way. That's the end of part 3. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy Old Time Tales. Come on back for part 4.